Hey y'all, welcome to the For Liberty and Justice podcast, where we mobilize a church, wake up the city, and take a stand for liberty and justice. As I was preparing for this episode and praying into it, the Lord reminded me of a guest I had on, I believe it was last year, and he just said, bring him back. And so I'm excited because I had such a great time last time because you just kept on going off. And so I was
Translation could not shut up.
Could not, but it was a great time. So I just want to introduce, for those who have not watched that episode about, I believe it was Fort Worth ISD School Board. This is my friend and colleague, Connor Weiler. You lead our Activism team. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited about this episode, mainly because I have no idea what's about to happen. And I think that's good because I feel like so many of our episodes are planned. Yeah. But that's okay.
Yeah, we just walked into this, what are we going to talk about?
Lord, what do you want to do?
What do you want to talk about?
So before we kind of jump into, I think, where the Lord's kind of navigating us, I want to hear a little bit more about you. Like, what do you do? A little bit of your backstory, where you're from, because you're not from the States. You're from Canada.
Right, I'm from Canada. So I was on my way to becoming a medical doctor, and I laid that down because I felt like the Lord wanted me to go into ministry instead. So,
I've known you, I think, for a year now, and I had no idea that was...
Okay. Surprise.
Okay, so you were going to be an MD. You're not. You're in ministry now. You are married to an absolute powerhouse.
Yeah.
You're expecting your first baby.
Yeah, due any day now.
Which is wild. She was actually on last week. Pastor Jasmine. I guess you don't call her Pastor Jasmine. Jasmine Weiler.
No, I call her the Reverend. So, yeah.
Stop it. That's incredible. All right. So how did you get involved in activism?
I think during COVID, when everybody sort of rolled over in the city I'm from. Yeah. So Canadians are very passive. Yeah. And so it's probably no smoke to anybody who's Canadian, but it's probably the easiest country to take over when you're talking about tyrannicals, because everybody's like, okay, I'm out of the way, you know? So
I'm sorry.
So COVID hit and everybody literally just rolled over. It was like not a person stood up. And so you've got Walmart open to the public with hundreds of people, but churches shut down. And so at that point, I'm like, you've got to be kidding. So I started looking into the facts. I mean, obviously, I'm going through med school, so I'm studying epidemiology. I'm looking at how this stuff works, how it's actually exponentially worse the more people you have, regardless of how big your space is. Sorry, Walmart. Maybe I shouldn't have said Walmart, but it's what the Canadian government did. They let the big corps stay open and shut churches down. And so I started looking at this stuff, seeing what some of these grassroots politicians and movements were saying about how this is really just kind of a cover-up to seize power. And you could kind of see that's what was happening. So I just started getting loud, making a lot of enemies, because people in Canada just want you to love your neighbor and be nice.
Yeah.
And, so that's kind of how I started getting louder in politics. Honestly, I hated that, that everyone's got that uncle at the dinner table who just goes nuts a little bit. I didn't want to be that. But when push came to shove, I'm like, you know what? Somebody's got to say something. So
I feel like
became that uncle.
You know what? And I love that. And that's why I think why you're here at this table is because someone had to do it. And so I feel like we're at this point in America where we're at a choose your own adventure stage where we can honor what the word says. We can follow just what the kingdom of God and just the rules and regulations of, like, hey, we can follow this, we can follow X, Y, Z, and this is what the Lord says will happen. Or you can choose the ways of the world, and we can do 1, 2, 3 and choose that way, and you're going to kind of fall into the exact pattern that happens literally with every nation in history that's fallen. Like look at Rome, and like look at that.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's predictable.
It is.
Line.
And that's, I think, the scariest part of just looking around, because I had the same wake-up call during COVID. Yeah. And it was just, and these are not the same people I did life with.
Yeah. And I think you guys can take it for granted in America because people in other countries don't learn, we the people, they don't learn about freedom. They don't learn about tyranny and why America exists in order to stop that from happening, and why there's a general, almost unspoken feeling that people deserve freedom in the world for these past 100 years. It's because of what America stands for. And so we didn't learn that growing up.
So, okay, this is a dumb question. People are like, well, here's another American. So we have freedom of speech. Yeah. We have right to bear arms. Y'all don't have.
It's implied. So again, I get the privilege of seeing both sides. So I got to learn American history and all that stuff. And my dad's very reform oriented, so he makes sure we know about all this stuff. But growing up, a lot of people, I get to see the other side where people just don't see that. And in Canada, they don't study, that kind of, it's just a different culture. And so I got to see both sides, what it's like to have it, what it's like to not have it. And everything Canada has is implied freedom, which just means you have the right to speech unless the government decides you shouldn't anymore. We have the right to bear arms unless the government decides you shouldn't, which is not real freedom, because as soon as something happens, COVID comes in, the Prime Minister, we honor you, by the way, Prime Minister Trudeau, nothing against you. But when all of a sudden COVID happens and, this is an excuse to enact the war measure, take everybody's freedom, you're locked in your houses under threat of, jail time sometimes if you leave. So that happens. So
that's a can of worms I'm just going to keep closed.
Sorry.
It's all good.
It's real. It's happening.
No, it's real, and I'm glad you're bringing it up because people don't understand what's happening just across the border. They just
a lot of it, like, to be fair, is over. Like it got pretty close and it was getting pretty bad, and there were some steps getting taken towards it's not a coup d'etat nowadays. It's much more subversive politics than that. But it was kind of wild. So
I think this is a good transition into the first thing I want to talk about, and I want to talk about a verse that kind of gets thrown around to just shut up Christians and keep them out of
Romans
government.
13.
Romans
We're talking
13.
about it before. Yeah.
So I know you got notes. What do you have to say on Romans 13?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we talked about some things that we felt like we were supposed to hit. One thing was this whole love your neighbor. Hey, Jesus wouldn't have gone against the grain. He would have just followed everything, right? He would have listened to Romans 13, listened to your governing authorities. They're put there by God, right? But I think the interesting thing about that is that the first three words of the original document constituting this country is we the people, implying we the people are the ones that run this nation. We the people are the ones who lead this nation. So if you're going to pull Romans 13 language about, hey, you need to submit to the God-ordained leaders of your nation, well, then that's you if you're the people here, because we the people is the first three words of the Constitution of the United States. It's what constitutes this nation, is that we the people derive this Constitution, and we rule ourselves. We set everything up so that tyrants can't come and take power. So if you're going to talk about Romans 13, actually it means the opposite of what most people are saying it means nowadays. It means you need to step out of the way government, let the people who are the God-ordained leaders have power to do what they want to do. With necessary morality, everything that was supposed to be, put in place. But it actually means the opposite of what people are trying to make it mean, being, submit to whatever the government wants you to do. And that's not necessarily always true.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I feel like, we're called to honor the people in authority, but what do we do whenever honor contradicts the word of the Lord?
Sure.
And that's not honoring, it's to contradict.
Or we call it preferred honor. Really, the highest law of the land does say that the people are supposed to have the power. So, if the person that we elect as a leader all of a sudden looks to take that power away from the people, we just honor the higher law of the land.
Absolutely. Well, and I'm thinking of specifically in Exodus, you have the midwives who there's a decree basically saying from the Pharaoh, this corrupt law that kill the babies. Yeah. The Israelites are too numerous, kill them. And the midwives are just like, we fear the Lord over, we actually fear you. We're not going to do it. Yeah. And they didn't. And just by default, you had, tons of babies who lived. Yeah. We're not going to be in a spot where we have to choose God or man.
Yeah, and so thankfully, like that describes the Canadian situation during that time. Yeah. Because you're literally living under this fear where if anybody figures out what I'm actually doing, so you've got Jesus who says that you shouldn't neglect gathering together as saints, and the government that says anything more than 9 people, you get in big trouble. People are getting their businesses closed down. People are getting fines. If they keep pressing it, a couple pastors got jail time, and they just decided that's the price to pay. So I can't list any names literally because if the government goes crazy again, they can incriminate people with this. But we literally had to decide, okay, are we going to lie because there's this authoritative power that's going to, beat it over us if we do this, or are we going to hide and still meet together? So yeah, we met together. We practiced the words of Jesus. We met, and yeah, we had church. We had community. We're not just going to go crazy, and lose it mentally because we're going to isolate because some government says we have to. So
yeah, and that's if your government's doing it. I just feel like all of this is a very good indicator of what's to come. And it was a very big pass or fail, and I think a majority of people just failed this test of you rolled over for convenience.
Yeah, and honestly, it felt like a gift to get to see a taste of it and get to see what comes if we don't turn things around. You asked why politics. Canada's just always been about 10 or 15 years kind of further down the road of what happens if we don't do something than America. And so it just gave a good picture of, oh, this is the world my kids grow up in if I don't do something now and be part of the solution.
Well, and I love what you just said about we get a preview, we get this early taste. It's like we're at Costco essentially sampling stuff and just see what's to come. But a lot of people are just saying, well, this is what the world's doing. Jesus, come back and take me. Literally, it's just this escapist mentality of, well, it's already evil. We're just going to bunker up and do nothing about it. But actually, it's the opposite. We have to just say, no, this is my line in the sand. I might have failed back there at a lot of stuff, but we're not going to do that anymore.
Yeah,
we're going to just buck up and we're going to fight this fight because, I didn't get in this fight for myself. I got in this for my kids.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the voices who are saying that's just the way the world's going to go, it's the world where the church, we're not supposed to be involved, are living in the country that people didn't do that to create. Like none of the founding fathers just rolled over and said, it's not worth a war. Let's just let the Brits do whatever they're going to do. It's the world, No, they recognized that you can't just let people weaponize the church and weaponize God with what they want to do. They had the Renaissance, they had the Reformation, and they saw, no, freedom is worth protecting over. Yeah. The God of the Bible is not afraid of a fight. I'm not advocating we go and storm the Capitol or anything at this moment, but it's worth a fight at this point to make sure, even if it's gonna stir the pot a little bit, we should at least voice a war with our voices that our kids don't have to take up arms again, frankly. So
absolutely. And I feel like this is a really good transition into what you're fighting for now.
Sure.
You want to give an update? The last time you were here, you were talking about the sex ed curriculum in Fort Worth ISD.
Sure.
So you want to give background to that and then an update?
First of all, honoring all the people who've been fighting for this longer than we have, for liberty and justice. But the update is we used to have a horrible curriculum that was basic perversion. The same level of stuff is happening in San Francisco was happening here. They voted that stuff out. They have a much better curriculum. There's still room to go. But they've got a much, much better curriculum that they're teaching our kids now.
Well, and just for a reminder, there's some people who haven't listened to that previous episode or just don't know or are out of state. This was a curriculum that they wanted to use that removed gendered terminology, essentially calling men and women bodies with penises, bodies with vaginas.
Yeah, they had images that would be considered hardcore pornography if a teacher taught this in the classroom. That's what was happening. But if they taught it after 4 p.m. on the street, they'd be locked up as a pedophile. Like that's what the law would say, and that's what was in sex ed curriculum for our kids. Yeah.
But a group, and it has been people before. Yeah, I mean, I want to say Italia de la Cruz has been just on the point of this, has been fighting. She ran for city council, I want to say, last year, but she's been fighting. Other mama bears have stood up and just been like, absolutely not, we're not doing this. And so these are huge wins. So what are we doing now? Like
so I'll just put the plug in right now. On February 27th, the Fort Worth ISD School Board's going to rubber stamp the decision to put a much more moral-based, godly curriculum in our schools. And so show up at the Fort Worth ISD building. It's one of the two. We'll get details to you on our page. When you go there, you can sign up to speak. We're going to rally beforehand at 4:45 to pray, worship, advocate for our little kids to make sure they're not exposed. And we're going to keep advocating for 100% abstinence-based curriculum that doesn't expose our kids. And from there, we're going to go after any pro-abortion stuff, any pro-perversion stuff. That's still a little bit in there, but this is a huge step in the right direction. The reason why it's important for you to come is because 8 of the 9 board members are left-leaning. That's blue. Sorry, that's so cheesy. But in any case, they're left-leaning, and there's been a bunch of efforts to make it, to get in the way of this thing being passed. And so we're not taking any chances. We're pulling out all the stops. We're telling the board, hey, you're going to rubber stamp this, pass it through, no funny business or else. And then we're going to move from more to getting a plan B, abortifacient, however you say that, to get that term out of the book, because they say it's not a baby until 3 weeks, frankly. And then we're going to get some of the pro-LGBT stuff out of it too. So yeah.
That's amazing. And this has been such a spiritual battle. Do you want to inform, I guess it's not a really big like story, but y'all sat in on a call, y'all had a sit-in meeting whenever they had a committee that was going to choose or approve it.
Yeah, just so people are aware. Yeah, just so people are aware of what happens. There's a separate committee that ends up deciding what curriculums to present to the board to rubber stamp. And so that's what happened. They did choose the most moral one. So we basically have 100 people who are, they're Christians in the room. They're from 8 or 9 different churches. They're the ones showing up fighting for Fort Worth's kids. And we've all got signs saying morality, no perversion, no pornography. And in that meeting, they've got a big screen up so they can apparently have live people a part of the meeting too, and it just happens to be facing everybody, and then pornography plays on the screen for 30 seconds straight while the guy who's running the meeting with the laptop kind of laughs at everybody shrieking in the room. So they got full-on pornography playing at these meetings, and you don't want to believe it's spiritual. You don't want to believe that there's agendaists and people coming after our kids in order to sexualize them and bring perversion into this nation so that they can do whatever they want without consequence. It's real. It's happening.
It is, and I think one of the biggest passions in my life is just fighting for purity and fighting for maintaining innocence of our kids, and we're seeing this like all-out attack against them. And I'm not asking for parents who are listening to this, and I'm not asking for just a normal person to run for office, but it is so easy to start getting involved. I mean, it's as simple as going to meetings.
It's a nation under God, by the people, for the people. Like it's we the people. And so there's a reason why people at the school board have the greatest amount of power compared to the president. It's because the people are supposed to lead. And so everybody gets out here and they're like, I'm not a politician. I'm not reform oriented. Are you a person? Then you are reform oriented, because it's up to you to take your Romans 13:1 God-given position as a leader in this nation and to do your part. And it's up to everybody. And at the end of the day, it's why the big message has been bashing the church to stay out of politics. And they've gotten our pastors in a way where we're teaching people that in order to follow Jesus, you can't get political. It's all a political agenda when it comes down to it, because they're keeping godly people out of positions to choose what matters, and they're taking them out where it counts. Because if we get godly people with moral values to fill all these thousands of seats in government, well then our kids are going to be fine. Our kids are going to be happy. Everything's going to be good. The nation's going to go well. Nobody's talking about the founding fathers saying, hey, freedom only works if you have a moral culture operating it. As soon as you get decrepit and demoralized and debased, it all falls apart. Like, I'm pretty sure the Romans had a lot of freedom to do what they wanted to do. The whole nation just crumbled. It's I'm getting on a tangent.
No, but that's why you're here. And again, all you have to do, like, the Lord has a plan of what he's going to do. Like, none of this is just a surprise to him. And all we have to do is partner with, like, God, what do you want to do? And
most people get those thoughts, I can't do anything. And it feels discouraging. And they feel like, I don't really have anything to say. And they don't recognize the difference between the enemy's voice trying to hinder them from stepping into something and what it truly is to not be gifted at something. And so they have things to bring to the table. They have something to say, but they just think, well, because I'm not a politician, AKA somebody who really is ambitious and loves power, like not what we want to be. They think because I'm not like that, I don't belong in roles like this, but you do. And you do have giftings there, and the enemy will try to convince you to stay out of it. He's tried to convince me to stay out of it for decades. But I think people need to recognize the difference with that.
We have people, I don't know how old they are, 60s, 70s on our teams, who they just say, I've always been good at this. I didn't know where it applied. And then it's just like, okay, let's use your gifts.
Yeah.
Right? Do you care about the Lord? Okay, cool. Do you care about our kids? Okay, cool. Well, they just happen to be talented writers. Start writing.
Yeah. And so many things in the politics space, like it's not complicated. You don't got to go up there like Trump and just start bashing down on things. Like some people on our activism team plan parties to make sure people have something fun to do. Other people like yourself, you're on an intercessor team where you pray for people in these spaces. We got people like Willie and Ryan. We honor you guys behind the scenes making edits so that we can get these awesome reels on Instagram and let people be aware and do it in an excellent way. Like there's so many things you can do to be involved.
And I think they use their fear of just like whether it's public speaking or just like being in front of stuff just to completely silence them. I know for me, the enemy tried to silence my voice for years. And I know at the beginning of, I don't know if I think I've shared this, but at the beginning of the last year, the Lord said, if you give me your yes, I'll unlock your voice.
Yeah.
And all it takes is like, Lord, I don't know what you're going to do, but I want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, use your
gifts. And people don't understand that fear is actually witchcraft.
Yeah.
And we all feel it from time to time. The last school board meeting, I got up there, my brain went completely blank. I couldn't think of anything. And I just kind of stuttered my way through a couple words. It happens to everybody. And so we can't just let that fear of public speaking take us out of the fight. That's so good.
I think there's more power in one righteous person stuttering their way through a speech than a person who has the heart for the enemy's agenda.
Just giving the most. It was a stutter fest. So
you know what? It got the job done. It got the job done.
Good.
I feel like I think it's time to talk about this. And for those who are listening, if you're listening with kids, I really hope you're not listening with kids, especially for this next part. I would say...
Do we encourage kids to listen to this podcast? I don't even know.
I think there's some that are really good for kids. Okay. I know specifically our Constitution series, our Foundation series is excellent. This one, parents, I would use wisdom. Maybe don't listen to it with them. But this is conversations that we need to be having with our children. I would not listen to this, especially with my children. I would say this is not child appropriate.
Yeah. No, it's good to know for.
But we've talked about already them showing porn in the meeting and the curriculum being incredibly pornographic and sexual. I feel like we are supposed to address the porn industry.
Yep. Let's go there.
Which is heavy.
$1 billion business. Yeah. Plays into trafficking. Makes some mega money.
No accountability. But the reason I want to start kind of honing in on this is I was reading an article about something completely unrelated. And at the bottom, they have links for more stories. And it just said porn star dies by suicide. And I don't know why, but I felt the Lord's grief about her death. And I feel like one of the weirdest and scariest things you can say is, Lord, would you give me your heart for these matters? Because for so long, for myself, it's just I'm all about justice. Let's bring the hammer. Let's drop the hammer.
Jehu, Jezebel died.
Yes. Let's do this. But for so long, I ignored the part of the verse where it's the throne of the Lord is consist of justice and righteousness, and I've completely bypassed righteousness. And what is righteousness other than having the heart of the Lord and being like the Lord and walking in his ways and walking in his virtues? And part of that is the Lord is in his kindness is compassionate about all. He desires that not one should die.
Yeah. So talk to me about what you felt in that moment. I'm so curious. I wanted to wait till now to ask.
And I don't know what, but as someone who has struggled with mental health problems and like illnesses in the past, and the Lord just radically delivered me in 2020 from it. It's just this moment of understanding the spiritual nature of what we're fighting.
Yeah.
We see it on all the platforms. We see it whenever people are mad about this podcast. We see it whenever we take a stand at these meetings. But the porn industry is so deeply demonic.
Yeah.
And just feeling the weight of this.
Yeah.
And people are always just... They celebrate sex in the name of just, oh, I'm independent and this is my expression of who I am. Mm-hmm. But like, you're partnering with the demonic. Yeah. You're partnering with all the stuff that comes with this. Yeah.
And this is where we're deeply different than an alt-right organization, because like porn's gripped the Republican Party. Let's just be real. Like we're not even standing up to it. But that is the way, I'm just going to say it, that is the way that literal demons will begin to manifest in your life and attack you. If you don't know the spiritual nature of this, one of the ways that Satan, who is every person's enemy, will attack you, a way in, we call them gates sometimes, in our cultures. A gate is through sexuality. And so through those moments, it's why Baal worship usually involves so much open sexual perversion, because there's literal spiritual gates that open in our hearts when we engage in sexual activity. And the person that we're engaging with that stuff with, be it, in reality or on some screen, whatever is attacking them almost gets an open door, like a portal, to begin to attack us too and gain ground on our souls, on our hearts. And so that's why it's so important to talk about this. We sometimes treat it like it's just behind a screen, so it's safe. It couldn't be further from the truth.
It's okay, if you're in a marriage where, both people are like, it's okay. It's never okay.
No, there's not going to be that's not going to be a good marriage to be in.
Well, and let's be real. Whenever you consume porn, you are contributing to sex trafficking.
It's true, yeah.
You're partnering with rape culture.
Could it be why the heart of the father broke inside of you when this girl passed away? Because so many of these quote-unquote porn stars were actually girls who have the most horrific childhoods and stories behind what they did, and they got started in some form of sex trafficking, where they just eventually, by tooth and nail, clawed their way out of the dirtiest part of it into a part that's still dirty, but at least they have a little bit of control in this form, and there's some money attached to it.
That they can hide their pain through the
glamorization.
Yeah, but
like literally some of the most brutal stories that would break your heart behind these people's, behind these porn stars' lives. So,
and I think that's why this fight for purity and maintaining, in a sense, is just so...
And it's a brutal cycle, and we've got to start at the lowest stage we're at, which is like the most decrepit. We're after our kids right now. That's what we're fighting for, and we got to work our way backwards. But it's going to fall. Pornography will fall in this nation. Yeah.
Well, and I want to hit, because we kind of just glanced over it. You're talking about the Republicans being just in this chokehold.
Yeah, they are.
Of it. Yeah. And this is why I don't love conservative platforms that much, because it's just, they talk about, oh, we're the greatest, and it's through this like lens of pride, but it's just, you're not seeing, what's behind the curtain.
Yeah, or they'll talk about freedom without mentioning the second part, which is, if you can't have a moral society to steward freedom, it's not going to be good for your society, And so here we are, opening up pornography, because it's all on the spectrum of this perversion. You can't just accept pornography and say no to pedophilia. Yeah. Is it because if you're watching one, the next thing is going to be there? It's just going to show up on your screen. What are we acting like that's not connected? And if you're opening up homosexuality like the Conservative Party has, well, what's to say that minors attracted persons is now wrong? Because that's what San Francisco did, and nobody could say anything. Because if I like somebody because they got blue hair, or they're an animal, or sexual deviation in this form is fine, what's the difference between 18 and 17, or 21 and 20, or 16 and 15, or wherever you're from? And we start blurring these lines, and it gets worse and worse and worse. You can't just accept sexual deviation in one form without accepting the whole pot, because it's all mixed.
Well, I remember whenever, I feel like a lot of college kids go through a liberal phase, and for about 30 seconds I went through mine, and I remember this argument I had with my dad. And we were talking about just the LGBT agenda, because I grew up in the softball world, which that's another podcast for another day.
Yeah, everybody's been in college sports, we get it.
Yeah, we don't even need to go into that. But I remember this conversation with my dad of of me defending that platform, and my dad looks at me in the eye and says, this fight is not just for it's not just for the LGBT. He goes, legalization of marriage is one thing, but the next thing you're going to see is people wanting to legalize sex with animals, and then it's going to be sex with minors. He was like, you mark my words, and we're 10 years down the road.
Yeah.
And we're already there.
Yeah.
And so I have to literally tell my dad, you were right. Like, I am thankful I got through that little blip of my life, but we have to realize this is what's happening. Mm-hmm. It is a very slippery slope.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's all connected, and it's all blurred lines, and the enemy will get you. This is okay. This is but this isn't okay, and then you're bound in that, and then it's just a little bit further down, and it's all blurred lines.
It is. I was reading a study, and this is what I found. It says research routinely shows that frequent porn consumers are more likely to sexually objectify and dehumanize others.
Yes.
They are more likely to express an intent to rape, less likely to intervene during a sexual assault, more likely to victim blame survivors of sexual violence, more likely to support violence against women, more likely to forward sex.
This is why the Conservative Party will not back fights against human trafficking. They're bound in porn, and so they can't fight trafficking.
And they are more likely to commit acts of sexual violence. You want to know, this is where we're at. We're at this point where the Me Too movement is completely glorified, but at the same time they're holding the hands of glorifying porn culture and saying it's empowering.
Yep.
We can't do that.
Yep. So literally what pedophiles will do is introduce kids to porn. And the same people saying Me Too, I was hurt in this way, are saying don't touch pornography. It's in some reverse pro-feminist movement or women empowerment movement, they're saying it's empowering women somehow. That's not, man. How is dishonoring your body any type of empowerment for a woman? I mean, imagine if that was your sister, your daughter, your mother on that screen. Would that be empowering them? That's somebody's daughter. That's somebody's mother. No.
And the new thing is OnlyFans. And I remember one of the things that stood out the most with my interview with Yaku Boyens is that he said that OnlyFans is just removing the middleman, and you're trafficking yourself when you participate.
True. That's such good language.
And so, have you ever watched their? It's a podcast / show called Whatever.
No.
This guy, he likes to stir the pot. He likes to bring in people from two sides of the spectrum. So he'll bring in just radical conservatives and the complete opposite. I mean, hardcore feminist, porn star, you name it. And people like Charlie Kirk have been on, Candace Owens, Michael Knowles, Abby Johnson. I don't remember her name. She's the other anti-abortion person.
Gosh, I'm the worst. Is it
I don't remember. She's real cute. Yeah. They brought her on.
I'm so bad with
basically
names.
If you have any traditional thought, just conservative, they're going to put the absolute opposite end of the spectrum. So, and they just have this open 3-hour discussion. I've never watched the whole thing because I can't get past about 2 minutes of it because these young girls are just so depraved with their thinking, and it's devastating. I remember specifically one episode where they were talking, they call them body counts, how many people you've been with. And they're like, oh, we've been with 50 people, and they're 18.
Wow. And
it broke my heart. It breaks my heart. But the thing that has plagued me since I've seen it, it was probably 2 months ago when I saw it. And it was with Charlie Kirk. And he was talking to these young girls. This girl had to have been 22. And she was famous on OnlyFans and talking about how just she's an exhibitionist. She loves all this kind of stuff. And she was glorifying her life, the fact that she was making money off of just people who are living in shame, but she had nothing behind the eyes. It was one of those of just baby girl, you are trapped. And she's having this conversation, and just this thing she's saying is just just toying with Charlie. And I'm not I don't really love conservative platforms or voices, but I have so much respect for Charlie Kirk in this moment because she's just baiting him just with his past and just talking about just some of his areas of downfall because he's open about his relationship with porn in the past and how he's been delivered from it. And it reminded me of that point with when Jehu comes and Jezebel's sitting in the tower, and she paints her eyes, and she's trying to just what are you going to do? And just peak Jezebel activity, and just Jehu just stares past her who's going to throw her down.
Okay.
And Charlie's just sitting there, and he's biting his tongue, and he just says, "Hey, can I ask you something?" She's like, "Yes." She's like, "What's your relationship with your dad?" And she starts laughing because she looks like she's about to cry, and she goes, "I don't talk to him." Aww. And as a mom to a daughter, and as someone who I have 2 younger sisters, and my dad is one of my best friends, this has been a cycle of just breaking my heart for these girls.
Yeah.
Because I can't get on board.
When God started humanity, he began with the family, and you'll notice that all of this stuff, whether it's porn, whether it's OnlyFans, whether it's abortion, everything we're talking about, it's all connected. It's always targeting family, and it's actually going to keep people from the thing that God created to fulfill them and bring them so much happiness in that family. I mean, let's talk about this OnlyFans girl where people are glorifying 100-person body count. What kind of groom is going to look for a woman like that? Who's like, oh yeah, you know what? I want a girl with the highest body count. I mean, there's a whole book in the Bible called Hosea where God basically is juxtaposing that we don't do this. And so he gets a prophet to go ahead and do it, where they're like, what are you talking about? So that God can exemplify how his people have rejected him. And so what it's doing is it's literally teaching young ladies to do the thing that's going to ensure they have the least chance possible of having a happy family. And they're going to get some dude who's also deeply bound in sexual perversion and hurts her crazy back. It's just not going to work. And then kids are left in a broken family. And it's just about breaking it down. Whether you want to look at it as the enemy just trying to destroy the people made in God's image, all people made in God's image, not the people, or you want to look at it from the political standpoint of tyranny trying to break down our nation. I mean, this was Rome. Yeah. They were too powerful to break from without, so they had to break it from within, and they recognized we've got to destroy it from the culture so it crumbles, and then people can come, barbarians can come and just pillage the thing. And that's America. It's too strong to take down. There's too many nukes. We have too much intel. It's too big. Yeah. The only way you're going to take it down is from within. And so that's what everybody from the information wars to the culture wars that we're seeing. Guys, TikTok is pushing this kind of stuff because they know if they can weaken a society's culture through perversion. And so they're pushing perversion on American kids with their algorithms, and on themselves they're eliminating it, and they're only letting educational videos be played. I mean, it's everywhere. Yeah. So no matter how you want to look at it from the spiritual side or the political side, it's just an effort to tear down the nuclear family, tear down the nation, and just make us weak. And what's this whole talk about? We don't want a unipolar globe. We want a multipolar globe. Have you heard about this? No. So World War II was a multipolar globe where you had Japan, you had Russia, you had Germany, you had the States, Italy, a bunch of nations where there's power spread between a bunch of dominant countries. Like, this is somehow going to work. And it always results in war because humans love dominance, and it's what happens. Anytime you have a unipolar globe where there's one distinct power, peace reigns. So when Rome was top dog, peace reigned, the gospel flourished, it was awesome. Well, 2,000 years later, the States was the country that after 1945 proved dominance, and we have a unipolar planet. Yeah. And so now there's peace for the last 80 years. The gospel's gone forth. People enjoy freedom. And there's talk of making this one world government, which is really spread America's power to China, to Russia, to everywhere else where they really just want dominance. They'll take over other places. They're openly talking about it. Like, that's somehow going to work for people, you know? And it's just not going to be good. And it's the agenda that's out here, but people aren't always aware of what's happening in world politics, and they can't just see the forest for the trees sometimes. But it's important to talk about, and it's important to let people know because peace is good. Romans 13, obey governing authorities, is because peace is good, and God loves peace, and it's good for the gospel. I mean, I can get on a rant about how people think persecution is going to be awesome, and when we all start killing each other in war, that somehow persecution is going to make the gospel thrive more. And I'm like, I mean, I'm reading the same Bible you do. I see persecution and what's happening there. Yeah, we can get on that in another podcast. Yeah. I'm not against persecution. I think it's awesome. I'm not a pre-trib guy or anything, anti-persecution and stuff like that. Don't mishear me, but that's a twisting of that truth. Yeah. So.
And I think it's important to remember the verse of like, we don't struggle against flesh and blood.
Yes.
Like people on the left aren't our enemy.
Yeah.
It's the spirit they're operating and behind it.
And if you think about it that way, you're not going to be alt-right and Republican because there's lots of demons in the Republican side too we got to get delivered from. We're not voting Republican because, they've got it all right and they're following Jesus the right way. We're voting Republican because they haven't 100% allied with Baal worship, like my blue lightsaber friend over here. Sorry, I keep making a joke. It's not funny.
I hope people can see it.
It's red and blue jokes, and people are laughing in the studio. It's just it's my dad humor. I got a son coming, so
I don't. Yeah, you got to get ready for that. I don't even know where I don't even know if I can get back on the rail I was on.
Sorry,
because of that. It's fine.
I'm so
it's
sorry.
Fine. But I want to touch on the fact that you said one world government, and I think what people don't realize is if you go to the UN or the WHO, the WHO, and they talk about what they want with one world government is they want one world religion.
Yeah.
They literally have summits to promote peace within religious entities.
It looks like they read the book of Revelation, all the bad stuff, and they're like, yeah, we want that. That sounds great.
And
let's be the beast. That sounds awesome.
There's the side note. There's a show called How I Met Your Mother, and a character, his name's Barney Stinson, and his favorite people in every movie is the bad guy. So like Karate Kid, he likes the bad guy. It's like they want to do that. That's what that just reminded me of. But again, we don't struggle against flesh and blood.
Some Christians remind me of Barney Stinson. Like, well, Herod, was he that bad? We're on like 14 different tangents right now.
I have no idea how this is going to end.
Yeah, I know.
This is going to be exciting.
Did you think we're going to end on The Who?
I did not.
Okay.
Honestly.
Sorry, that's me,
that
you
was
guys.
A weird
totally
turn from the porn industry, but it's okay. What else do you have to say? What else is on your heart?
I don't know. Porn's not good. Let's go kick some tails in the spirit realm.
Let's bring it back to activism.
Yeah. Okay.
It doesn't have to be someone who has a degree in political science.
One of my favorite things, so I kid you not, I did the worst job. I think my voice cracked 14 times, and it was like, could you please, Mr. Sir, take perversion out of our schools? It wasn't good. But one of my favorite speeches at this was listening to somebody at our youth group named Matthew Carrera, who's kind of rising up in this reform space. He's 18, 19 years old. He gets up there, looks the board in the eye, and says, guys, this is my generation that we're throwing out. And I got to stand in the gap for my generation. And I'm just sitting there with goosebumps all over my body. I feel God. And I'm like, you go, Matthew, you go, you get him. And if the place was allowed to roar in applause, it would have happened. And so Matthew talked to me before being like, do you think I have anything to say? Do you think I should go? I don't think I'm going to sign up to speak. And he's not that type of guy, but he gets up there, writes something down, delivers it. And at the end of the day, they're listening to the people. Whatever public shows up and swings the vote is who they're going to listen to. And I don't even think these 8 out of 9 left-leaning board members are bad people. I think they're tired from being bullied from the left. And people who've got agendas and pro-gay stuff in the name of acceptance, but really they just want perversion. They want to get after our kids. They want to make sexual deviancy normal so they can do whatever they want without punishment. And they're using those poor kids who are sexually confused, quite frankly, but they're just tired of being beaten by the left and pressured and threatened and tormented. And so I'm not saying we be an equal torment from the other side, but they should feel some pressure.
Well,
you know?
And if I've learned anything over the past few years is that typically these councils and these boards fold under pressure.
Yeah.
Every single one.
And it's not like, I'm not saying they're getting terrorized from the left. Let's terrorize them from the right. Let's have the Father's heart, do it in love. But at the same time, what did Father God say about those who hurts his kids?
Yeah.
You know, like there's a time to be fair. If you don't know, he says it's better that you get a rock tied to your neck and get thrown overboard in the sea. It's not good for you. That's Jesus kind of quoting Father God's heart. So it's not good.
He would rather you sink to the bottom of the ocean with a millstone tied around your neck than lead the next generation astray.
Yeah, so it's okay. Hurt one of these little ones, I think he says, something like that. So it's okay for them to feel some God righteous, some God-inspired righteous indignation.
We are literally called to raise the next generation. Like two verses that I wrote down is, how can a young person stay on the path of purity? By living according to your word. Yeah. And train up a child in the way he should go. And when he is old, he's not going to depart from it. Yeah. Like, we don't have to be crazy activists. We don't have to be marching the streets. Should we lead an example? Absolutely. Will my kids look back and think, wow, my mom was a little wild, but we knew where she stood. Yeah. But we're also called to take a stand for our kids. And my children can look back and say, this is what my mom said to us, and this is how she raised us.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question. I want to almost ask the listener this, because this is what changed it for me when I was 12 years old. And it didn't fully sink until I was an adult. But God was maybe doing something in me before I was aware. If you woke up in Nazi Germany, and let's say you were 16, 17, you were 30, you were 12, and you saw Jews being hauled off to concentration camps, would you have done something? Like, what would you have done? What would you do if you woke up there, Taylor?
I would have gone scorched earth.
Okay.
That's
because the thing is, most people in Berlin weren't aware that concentration camps were killing people. They thought they had playgrounds and schools and books.
They were okay with people just being sequestered to an area that they thought was okay.
Yeah. And so the question I want to ask the listener is, what would you have done if it's 1943, 1944, and there's wind and rumors that 6 million people are being exterminated in your country? Because when you look at this triad of perversion, pornography, trafficking, and abortion, that's what's happening, because they feed each other in a cycle. And you introduce perversion and pornography, which leads to trafficking, which leads to open sexual relationships, be it with an illegal prostitute or somebody that you just feel like you should have loose sexuality with. And then abortion is always the result of this. And so we don't have 6 million people dying in this country. We have 50 million. It's a new million every year. Mostly, I'm going to hit racism too, 80% are African American. So not only are we killing 1 million people in this country, most of them are black people. So if you say that you're not racist and you're pro-abortion, that was actually founded in racism. You can read some of the history on it, but we're literally in a modern day genocide. So if 1943, 1944, you would have stood up and done something, scorched earth, as you said it, that's how I felt. I'm like, I don't care what enemies I would have made. I would have done something. I'm not just going to let, you're looking at Anne Frank boy in striped pajamas. I wouldn't let that happen. Well, it's happening today.
Absolutely.
There's 1 million people a year.
Absolutely.
Do the math. It's 3,000 people a day that die by abortion. And we're just here saying perversion's okay, loose sexuality and perversion's okay, abortion's okay.
It's our right to slaughter these babies. They're actually humans. You want to know what phrase was thrown around in the 1940s? They're not real people.
Yeah,
that's what
true.
Was thrown around about Jews, around people who are homosexuals, about gypsies, about people of lower classes that they thought were not necessary to their life.
Hitler made some wild claims. But if you would have done something then, it's time to do something today. Hitler made some wild claims. There was a phrase going around the world that said, I wish we could keep inferior people from breeding, was what was said. Taylor, it wasn't Hitler. That was Roosevelt. Our president said that because the thought in the world was literally genocide focused. It wasn't genocide, it was perfecting DNA, perfecting humanity. And so you want to know why Aryan race education could flourish in Germany and why no one said anything when Hitler's talking about the Aryan race and let's perfect humanity. It's because that was popular thought, is let's perfect people. Let's find a way to keep inferior people from breeding.
And
that was when sterilization techniques were going nuts. And so there's always pop culture against good values. That's almost like one of those fans on the fire of evil. It's always there. It's never easy to stand against the current, but you have to do it. It's not easy to stand against abortion, sexual perversion, LG, all the letters, or abortion. It's not easy. Pornography, but we have to do it because people depend on it. At the end of the day, the wages of sin is death, and people die. And so the gift of God is eternal life. And so if we're not fighting for righteousness, if we're not fighting for godly values, if we're not fighting for the kingdom come and Jesus to come in the earth through the gospel, and we're not going to talk about what Jesus did and be voices of love and carry the Father's heart in these spaces, well, then who's gonna? Death is going to result. There's not going to be eternal life. And it's just going to get worse. And so we can sit by and watch and just quote, last generation's preachers, the world's just going to hell in a handbasket. It's all going down. Or we can stop, look like Luther, Martin Luther, who decided, I'm going to reform something. I'm going to stand against the powers that be. I'm going to make a difference, which leads to the Renaissance, which leads to the world spiraling up for a change. And guess what? God wins. Who said it's got to be in the sweet by and by? Who said that God can't win on earth as it is in heaven? Which did Jesus say? Rant over. So,
and I think that's the perfect way to end this episode.
Okay.
Because you just summed up an hour of talking into one little blip because it matters that much. Like, I'm not even going to re-spout what you just said because it's the time was last 10 years. The time was the last 20 years technically. Mm-hmm. But right now, if you've been living under a rock, now is the time to start doing stuff. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like, we have to do it.
Yeah, and literally, don't let me be the only one saying it, because I'm just a dude. I keep studying over my words. My wife's always like, simplify, you're saying it too complicatedly. I'm like, I'm sorry, there's too much information. I'm trying to make it all make sense. Like, I'm just a normal person too. Mm-hmm. And like, we can't just let people like us be the ones saying stuff. Everybody has influence between 100 to 500 to 1,000 people on Instagram and Facebook. Mm-hmm. That's a platform where if we just had half of the body of Christ start saying stuff, we'd reach everybody like that. Yeah. Like, do the math, times 500 people by how many Christians there are in the States, and see how many people get the message across if we all start saying something.
There's a study known as the bystander effect, where something bad starts happening and no one does anything, but all it takes is one person to stand up to the evil that's happening, and the rest of the people join in. And that's where we're at. Yeah. Like, bystander season is over. Yeah. Now is the time. Like, even I don't care that half of my family does not like what I do. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to stand up. Yeah. And other people are going to join me.
I feel like maybe one thing that we could end with, I know you said it's over, but there's a prophetic word that the last season was generals of the faith, right? So you got guys like Oral Roberts, you got Billy Grahams, you got all these great voices that are rising up, and what are they? They're generals. But there's the prophetic word, I'm not going to get it perfect, but basically it's that the next great awakening, the third great awakening, is going to be so forceful with the power of God, a man is going to have to get out of the way, otherwise it's just going to fry. It's going to kick tail. And the next thing that God's doing is not with the generals of the faith, it's with a nameless, faceless army of humble, servant-oriented people who are willing to get out of the way and let God be God. And so that's you. If you're watching this, you're called to be humble, nameless, faceless, servant-hearted army who's willing to say, God, use me, use my voice. I'll speak up, I'll say something, I'll do something. And so go ahead and do it. Go ahead and partner with that. It's what God's doing in the earth next.
All right. So this is actually our last end. Would you mind praying over the nation that these nameless, faceless, just everyone just would rise up?
Yeah.
Like, that's what we need.
Okay.
And like, I want people to be empowered to know that for such a time as this. This, if I perish mentality.
Yeah.
That I'm not going
Esther
down.
If you're not following.
I'm not going down without a fight. So would you just pray, and then I'll close us out?
Yeah, Lord, we just pray that, as Taylor said, that Esther's would rise up in this generation. Lord, Mordecai's too, Ezra's, Nehemiah's, everybody, that you're beginning to start a flame of a fire in their heart. They're feeling pricked. They're feeling provoked. Lord, let this talk be like that moment in the Bible where somebody's so heart-wrenched they cut a person up in pieces and send them to the 12 tribes to provoke them to action. God, I pray for a godly provocation to go across this conversation into people's hearts, and I pray that you'd mark them to make a difference. We're not going to use crazy words like reform. God, would you mark them to love their neighbor when it counts, when their neighbor could be in jeopardy if they don't do something now in this hour? Would you mark them now to step up, stand in the gap? God, would you not find this nation to be somebody that has no one to stand in the gap? I just see in my imagination, sometimes God shows me pictures. I see a picture of Aaron when he's holding the censer as the work of hell is going across the people. People are dying, and he goes and he holds a scepter of incense before the Lord, which signifies worship before the Lord. God, would you raise up Aarons who are willing to stand between the living and the dead and put an end to death decrees in this nation? God, would they lift up worship to you? Would they lift up their voice to you? Would they lift up their hand and say, I'm going to do something? And God, would you partner with that decision? Would you partner with that willingness to serve you? And would you do a move in this nation? Would you stop the plagues of death? Would you stop the operations of death that the enemies used to kick our teeth in for the last couple decades? And would you let revival rise up in this nation as a nameless, faceless army decides, I don't care who gets the credit. I just want God to be glorified. In Jesus' name.
Dude, Connor, thank you so much. I never know what's going to happen whenever we start talking, but it's always good. So I just honor you for what you carry. I'm excited for this next season for you, just whether it's activism, fatherhood, all this stuff. And I'm really excited to see how it plays out. It's my joy and it's an honor. It's Thanks awesome. For having me. Absolutely. So that's all we have for today's episode. I just want to make sure that you're following us on Facebook, Instagram. I think it's technically called X, but we're going to call it Twitter because we're old school. So you never miss a bit of news. We'll be talking about our events that we have coming up, including our helicopter, hog hunt, and barbecue. I just want to remind you that we are completely dependent on people like y'all who listen. So make sure you're saving these, you're sharing these, and get the word about what we're doing. I want to shout out our amazing production team. Riley and Willie are crushing it, and I just honor y'all for the work y'all are doing. They are so incredibly creative. And again, my name is Taylor, and this is the For Liberty and Justice podcast, where we mobilize the church, wake up the city, and take a stand for liberty and justice. See y'all next time.